14 May 1945. Nuremberg. A schoolroom without glass, a notebook scavenged from a ruined office. A civilian writes a line that could not be spoken aloud. In this new peace, Karl M. sets down, guilt will be rationed like bread, and silence will be our currency. He is 33. He is a clerk without a desk, a husband without a home. He writes quickly because the curfew is strict, because the Americans have posted guards at the corner, because the walls still smell of smoke. Outside, the city is red brick turned to red dust, rubble mountains with names. Children scale them like volcanoes. Everywhere, the mathematics of collapse. 56 million cubic meters of debris across the nation, the reports will later say. A woman named Hilda, 31, writes in an oral history, "We counted bricks like prayers. In Berlin, they called them Trümmerfrauen, rubble women. In Munich also, in Dresden, in Cologne. In Nuremberg, the word was the same and the work was the same. A bucket brigade in slow motion." The arithmetic of a day, 1 woman, 2 hands, 300 bricks, cleaned of mortar and stacked for reuse. Multiply by 1,000 women. Divide by 6 days. Subtract rain. The city becomes a fraction of itself, and then, cautiously, a future. Allied occupation forces enter with maps and orders clipped to boards. The curfew runs from 9 at night to 5 in the morning. The first week is silence enforced. Non-fraternization is the rule written in a language most residents do not speak. There are signs, off-limits. There are patrols, American MPs in jeeps, British MPs on motorcycles in other zones, Red Army soldiers in the east. Documentation arrives as its own kind of weather. General attitude, subdued, compliant, hungry, reads a U.S. military government report for Middle Franconia, dated 20 May 1945. Civilians fearful of retribution, ready to exchange information for food. The document notes the absence of men. It notes the presence of fear. The missing are counted on street poles, names stapled to wood. Karl walks down Königstrasse and reads page after page of the disappeared. Vermisst seit 3245. Zuletzt gesehen am Hauptbahnhof. Ostfront. Each slip is an equation without a solution. The mathematics of absence, 1 name multiplied by 1,000 streets, equals a city where no one speaks a full sentence. Neighbors say he fell when they mean, we don't know. Women say he is on transport when they mean he is missing. Surrender does not simplify. It inventories. The first weeks teach simple arithmetic. You must show yourself when asked. You must open your door after curfew only to occupation troops. You must wear the face of compliance. There is fear of rapine from the east, stories whispered between ruins. In the American zone, the fear is of interrogation, of a question with a long tail made of paper. The paperwork begins as a thin file. It grows. The hunger begins as a dull ache and becomes math on a ration card. Summer fades into the winter of 1945 to 46, then into the bitter hunger winter of 1946 to 47. There are numbers that still sting. Adults in cities receive, some weeks, less than 1,000 calories a day. Work cards allocate a little more to those who lift heavy loads, a little less for those who do not. Potatoes are counted, turnips divided by mouths in a room. The line forms before dawn at a distribution center staffed by city officials in borrowed coats. The arithmetic of a month is 4 lines. A woman will tell an interviewer in a 1980s oral history, only 1 line pays. The ration card becomes a ledger of the body. Bread is bread, but also payment. In the back alleys, another market emerges with its own currencies and rates. Cigarettes. The black market is the only market. An Allied intelligence summary notes Riley in December 1946, and its prices index the mood. 1 carton of American cigarettes, Lucky Strikes preferred, buys meat, eggs, repairs, sometimes an apology. The exchange rate fluctuates with rumor and train schedules. In Carl's notebook, a fragment, Father's watch for potatoes, 12 kilos. Enough to reach Christmas if we do not invite anyone. The mathematics of hunger is pitiless. 12 kilos divided by 3 people, minus the visiting cousin, minus the neighbor's child left alone, equals a question you answer with your stomach. The coal shortage makes winter an adversary that knows your name. The raw outputs are under British control, deliveries are promised and postponed. In the Soviet zone, food is requisitioned. People walk, again, along roads carrying things that were once furniture. There is a word for taking coal from trains, a wartime propaganda figure, the Kohlenklau, that lingers as a shadow in the hunger winter. The trains run late. The stoves burn low. Children develop rickets. A photograph in the Bundesarchiv shows a mother holding a baby whose wrists appear too thin to hold on to life. The caption, Berlin, 1947. The rest needs no caption. Denazification arrives as a questionnaire of 131 questions and as a new alphabet of guilt. The Fragebogen is handed out at city halls, in schools turned into offices, in church basements. It asks when you joined, what you read, where you worked, which organizations you paid dues to. It asks if you were in the SA, the SS, the NSDAP. It asks about donations. It asks what you believed, but in the language of what you did. It is a census of complicity disguised as a bureaucratic form. Carl fills his out on a cold March morning in 1946. He lists his job as a bookkeeper for a municipal supplier. He writes that he joined the party in 1938 for professional reasons. He writes that he never attended rallies. He writes that he typed. He writes that he has a wife and a child. His denazification file, later stored in a regional archive, will contain a statement from a neighbor, 2 signatures from former colleagues, a list of dates for mandatory appearances. It will contain, in a handwriting not his own, the word Mitläufer, follower. This is the arithmetic of denazification. There are 5 categories in the Sprüchkammern. The hearing chambers run, in the American zone, with German lay judges under Allied oversight, Hauptschuldige, major offenders, Belastet offenders, Miederbelastet, lesser offenders, Mitläufer followers, Entlastet exonerated. Each category is a gate with a slot for paper. The logic is legal, but the impulse is political and pragmatic. A nation must be run. Railways must move, schools must teach, sewage must flow. Denazification files pile up in the tens of thousands, then in the millions. The initial intent is purgation. The evolving practice is selection. An occupation report from 1947, stamped secret, not to be circulated beyond the US military government in Bavaria, reads, "Our problem is less who is guilty than how to classify guilt without collapsing administration. The man who kept the waterworks running in 1943 is the man we need to keep them running now." The mathematics of guilt becomes a calculus of necessity. The numbers do not lie, but they recalculate themselves. Trials proceed against major figures. Camps like Dachau and Landsberg hold war criminals, some of whom will later be released, some hanged. In the chambers, the average case takes minutes, not days. The majority of those processed fall into the mass of Mitläufer and Entlastet. A small fraction are barred from professions. A smaller fraction serve prison terms. The line between necessity and justice is drawn by a pencil that erases as often as it underlines. Almost everyone says they joined for a job, notes a British political officer in a 1946 briefing for the Ruhr area. Almost no one confesses belief, yet somehow the meetings were crowded. Notation as indictment. We need engineers, an American advisor writes on the inside cover of a report on teacher shortages in Hesse, even if they wore brown. Teachers are dismissed in the hundreds and then thousands. They are retrained in compressed courses and quietly invited back. The system needs stability more than thorough justice. A generation learns that names can be changed by a stamp if your skills are in short supply. The expulsions begin in the east and end at platforms in the west, where there are no empty rooms. Between late 1945 and 1947, millions of Germans from Silesia, East Prussia, Pomerania, and the Sudetenland arrive with luggage that does not contain the last winter. The trains bring them to towns that already exist as lists of shortages. A dispatch from a Bavarian district office in February 1946 records the arrival of 4,000 expellees in a county built for half that number. It records also the mathematics of shelter, 5 per room in some places, 2 families per kitchen, barns converted. The word is Flüchtling, and later will be Heimatvertriebene, expellees with a claim to a home that is no longer theirs. Erika K., 24, from Breslau, arrives in Bayreuth on 8 February 1946. Her arrival card, preserved in a county archive, lists a mother, a child, and a trunk. The trunk contains photographs of men in uniforms from other wars. The town lists her as needing accommodation. The municipal housing office assigns her to an apartment on a street that still smells of smoke. The apartment belongs to a woman who has lost her husband in the East. The arithmetic of scarce rooms is unsentimental. Karl finds himself on the other side of paper. On 12 March 1946, he is ordered to share his 2 rooms with Erika's family. He writes in his notebook, "We will be 7. Doors will remain doors, but not boundaries. Tension is not a headline, it is an inventory." The locals call the newcomers refugees with a tone that can mean pity or contempt. The expellees call the locals lucky with a tone that can mean all the things luck means. "They come with lice and stories," an elderly man writes to a cousin in the French zone. "They call each other by names that do not belong here." The mathematics of scarcity adds friction where warmth is needed. Mobile job lists are created. People inflate their skills to fit the advertisements. The Labour Office assigns work to Erika in a sewing room. Her mother minds the child while waiting in lines that do not move. In the West, the Adenauer government will later proclaim a Day of Homeland for the expellees. In 1946, there are just rooms, ration cards, and prejudice that has not had time to conceal itself. The displaced persons, Jews, forced laborers, POWs from across the continent, live in camps near German towns that have become their own kinds of memory palaces. Feldafing, Landsberg, Fehrenwald in Bavaria, Bergen-Belsen in the British zone, innumerable others. They are guarded by Allied soldiers and by their own committees. Their markets are lively. Their newspapers, in Yiddish, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, read optimism and then urgency into days that linger. A U.S. Army photograph shows the gate of the DP camp at Landsberg, its temporary buildings arranged like a hope that will not become permanent. "We preferred to pretend they were far," a woman from Munich recalls to a journalist in the 1970s. "But they were close. We saw them on trams. We saw the numbers on arms and looked away. It was easier to turn than to ask." Allied occupation regimes force viewing. Film screenings are organized in spring 1945 and onward. The towns are marched past the camps and through barracks and past storerooms of hair and shoes. "Local population compelled to view atrocities," reads an entry in an after-action report from Dakor's liberation. "People vomit. People cry. People cry. People say words that are too small. We did not know," is the sentence that begins many interviews in Allied interrogation reports between 1945 and 1948. "We did not know" is the sentence that also functions as self-defense. Property records in the Bundesarchiv tell another part of the story. Furniture taken from deported Jews listed as abandoned property, then assigned, then quietly kept. Karl stands in 1946 at the edge of a DP camp near Nuremberg. He does not enter. He watches men play cards near a barracks, their sleeves rolled to elbows. He watches a child run with a piece of bread held like a medal. He turns away before the child's mother can look at him. He writes in his notebook that night, "Sometimes the air smells of the brick ovens again, but it is only the bakery." The gap between what is remembered and what is recounted becomes the scaffolding for the new democracy. Politicians in the Western zones speak of a Stunde Null, a 0 hour, as if one can divide time like a public utility. There is a wish to begin again at a point that wasn't. The Marshall Plan begins to pour in money, machinery, and instruction in 1948. The crates are labeled ERP, European Recovery Program. They contain powdered milk, road graders, typewriters, hammers. In schoolyards, children drink American milk from tin cups. In city halls, men in suits study how to make balance sheets that include external assistance without making it sound like dependence. The occupation powers publish their own arithmetic. Output up 12% in raw steel, a British report notes in late 1948. Productivity still hampered by lack of coal and transport. Karl gets a job in a rebuilt city office in 1947 as a clerk in the municipal housing department. It is a job fashioned from the city's wounds. He measures rooms, he registers overcrowding, he writes notices of allocation and eviction. He knows that every form has a face attached. He knows that every face has papers. His denazification file is closed as Mitlofer with a fine he cannot pay in money, and so pays with voluntary labor. He is posted to oversee rubble clearance on alternating Sundays. He becomes a man whose handwriting decides the arithmetic of walls. Allocations are math and apology, reads a memo he drafts for his superior, signed and preserved in the city archive in 1948. We can only assign what exists. The currency reform on 20 June 1948 rearranges the value of what exists. Reichsmarks become Deutschemarks. Most savings become numbers on a page that mean less. Shop windows fill overnight with goods that had been behind counters or behind walls. Prices are printed in new ink. The black market withers like a vine in winter. Abolition of most price controls is announced by Ludwig Erhard, sometimes without fully informing the Allied authorities before doing so. A U.S. Civil Affairs report from Bavaria notes astonishment. Goods appeared as if from nowhere. We have reason to suspect they came from everywhere. By July, shelves are less theatrical. By autumn, the new arithmetic of wages, prices, and rents is the arithmetic that counts. Cigarettes return to being a vice more than a currency. With the reform comes the Cold War through the kitchen door. The Berlin blockade starts on 24 June 1948. In the skies, mathematics that looks like mercy. Coal, food, machinery, and medicine drop from aircraft at rates that become their own myth. More than 2,000 tons a day, then 5, then 8. The German public is watching the sky, reads an occupation. Public opinion report. The airlift teaches a new equation. The Americans are here not just as conquerors but as providers. In discussions about denazification in the months after, the hard edge dulls. The new feared category becomes not former party member, but communist sympathizer. Papers shift accordingly. We need reliability against the East, a Bavarian Interior Ministry memo notes in September 1949. Past associations are relevant, but current loyalties are decisive. Files started as ledgers of guilt become indices of utility. The Federal Republic is born in May 1949 in Bonn. Nuremberg is in a country with a constitution written not just to prevent dictatorship, but to make complacency the enemy of legality. The basic law speaks of dignity. It does not speak of how to distribute rooms. In offices, cabinets are filled with files from older times. The United States and Britain merge their zones into the bizone, then the trizone with the French. They track output like doctors track pulse beats. The Wirtschaftswunder is not one miracle, but a series of small increments measured with pencils. A factory in Nuremberg that once made electrical parts for bombs now makes electrical parts for refrigerators. Carl watches small indexes climb. He reads company reports that boast productivity without acknowledging which machines were dismantled for reparations in 1946 and now reinstalled or replaced in 1950. He learns the new words that will define the decency of his work: co-determination, social market economy, works council. He files his papers accordingly. Stability tops justice in short term, an American economist writes in an internal memo from the Marshall Plan Office in 1949. Justice without bread creates instability. The mathematics is not cold, but it is unromantic. The Housing Office institutes a points system that weights war damage, number of children, nationality, employment status. Expellees are moved up the list, then down, then recalculated as the political winds change. The arithmetic of scarce space becomes, for Carl, the daily front line. Men with voices loud from past positions come to his window and demand what they think they deserve. Women with voices quiet from habit ask without looking up for anything they can have. He reaches for the form that best fits, for the word that will close the conversation without closing the heart. He is learning the politics of sentences. In schoolrooms cleared of rubble, the first textbooks of the new republic lay out a history that is purposeful in its omissions. A 1953 Bavarian history text, in an edition now stored in a university library, devotes 12 pages to Bismarck and 2 to the Third Reich. It speaks of misleaders and abuses of power. It speaks of the suffering of bombings and of flight from the East. It does not name the local men who signed requisition orders. It rarely names the Jews of the city who did not come back. A new memorial is erected in 1951 near the main church, a statue of a suffering figure that could be soldier or civilian. The inscription reads, "To the victims of war and tyranny." It is a category in which everyone can hide and no one can be found. At the same time, there are new documents that do not hide. He reads in a newspaper article in 1950 about a trial in the American zone where a camp guard is sentenced. He reads in 1952 about the restitution laws that promise compensation to Jewish survivors and to political victims. In his office, a memo arrives instructing staff to assist with requests for documentation about confiscated property. The files do not always exist. The office must certify that they cannot be found. He has a rubber stamp for this. He comes to hate it. A Jewish DP camp becomes a set of apartments in 1956. The camp sign is taken down. A report filed with the district government notes, "Orderly handover, no incidents." The memory of what was there moves from the street to the archive. The archive is hard to enter without a reason lettered and approved. Memory becomes something you must schedule. He watches the bodies change. People look thicker. The faces fill out. Shoes lose holes. Bicycles become small cars. In 1952, he watches a Volkswagen Beetle with a local license plate go by his window and thinks of the years when the only cars were GIIs. The factory whistles return to a rhythm that sounds like normalcy. It is not peace as a feeling, it is peace as a habit. He recognizes this as its own sort of courage, not heroism as headlines define it, but a repetitive duty that saves children from numbers on lists. All of it rests, he believes, on unspoken bargains. In his notebook he writes, 17 October 1954, "We agree not to ask who did what between 1933 and 1945 if we agree to show up on time and do what needs doing. We agree to call the last war something that happened to us and to not always say what we did. In return, we get pay packets and our children get a different future." He knows he exaggerates. He knows he is only naming one part of a larger truth. He writes it anyway. It could not be spoken. It can be written. The Cold War patterns itself into the blocks of his city. A new American base is built away from the center. Soviet radio stations broadcast from the other side of a border that is now a line not far away. The mathematics of the Cold War is tonnage and divisions, but also the number of men on a factory floor who attend a communist rally. In 1950, a friend at work is asked to sign a declaration against anti-democratic activities. He signs. The next week, he complains that the city is still employing a former party functionary in the building permits department. The file notes that the functionary is technically indispensable. The phrase repeats across departments. It becomes a system. It is a mercy and a betrayal, depending on where you sit in a room. Public opinion in US zone has moved toward focusing on present and near-future issues. An Allied survey concludes in 1951. The footnote acknowledges widespread unbelief in own guilt. The same report notes that most Germans now see the Americans as protectors. Occupation reforms, women's suffrage implemented in state constitutions, trade unions reconstituted, courts restaffed, become features of a political landscape no longer called occupied. Elections are held. Adenauer wins more than he loses. In Nuremberg, the SPD dominates city politics. Karl votes always, sometimes ambivalently. He never fails to vote. In 1958, the Ulm Einsatzgruppen trial forces details back into newsprint that had become theory. Men are named. Their work is described. Mass shootings are words that sometimes fit on a single line. New systems of guilt emerge that are not the Spruchkammern categories, but the ordinary criminal courts finding their jurisdiction. In 1961, the Eichmann trial is broadcast as sound and text and photographs. Karl listens to some of it on radio, crackling, with his daughter in the next room, reading a textbook that still calls the last war a tragedy rather than a crime. He understands that the arithmetic of what can be said changes as the generation changes. All the while, he does his job. He moves from housing to an office managing permits for small business renovations. He learns the new words, safety codes, labor inspections, compliance. He cannot help seeing that the men who sign papers now often signed papers before, under different names and for different purposes. In a denazification file, he consults to check a date. He sees a leaf of paper that is not meant to be gone through by him. It lists names and redactions. It lists the sentence, "not to be employed in public office," then a stamp that says amended. The mathematics of guilt remains a set of adjustable variables. He writes in his notebook again, now in 1963, after hearing on the radio that the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials have begun, and the prosecutor, a young man, has said that Germans must know what Germans did. He has an allotment plot at the edge of the city. He is learning to grow beans. He is learning to cook without counting ration stamps. He is 51. He experiments with new kinds of sentences that could be spoken now, but are not, in his house. He writes, "For years we believed that by rebuilding walls we were building forgetfulness into the bricks. But walls remember. The mortar is a mixture of lime and things we did not say. The currency is no longer silence, but silence still buys an afternoon without a quarrel." He hopes for his daughter. He does not wish to give her a list of all the things he has not said. He teaches her instead how to read numbers on utility bills and how to hold a pencil so that writing becomes its own act of peace. He does not believe in absolution. He believes in the work of hands and in the usefulness of archives. He believes that a file will always be incomplete because a life is not a form. He listens to marches on the radio and to church bells and to factory whistles, and he writes with care so that the paper will not sound bitter when it is read by anyone who may find it. The notebooks are kept in a drawer, in the bottom, under a folded shirt. He knows that with enough time, even the careful drawers are opened by those who want to know. In another part of Germany, a different version of these years is taught. In the East, the official narrative presents anti-fascism as a doctrine and a birthright. The past is assigned to a capitalist West, the future to a socialist East. Schoolbooks there say the victims were heroic partisans of a class struggle. They avoid the complicities that did not fit. In the West, the official narrative presents democracy as a doctrine and a birthright redeemed. The past is assigned to a dictatorship that fell, the future to stability that holds. Elsewhere, other accounts are written by those who hold the pen. Every account is an index of what is allowed and what is necessary. We can read the math of these years in numbers that are not emotions but explain them. To end 1945, there were 20 million homeless in the western zones. By 1955, housing completions in West Germany exceed 500,000 units annually. In 1946, the average daily caloric intake in some city districts fell below 1,000. By 1950, it had doubled. In 1947, there were 3.6 million denazification cases opened in the American zone. Most ended with the designation of follower or exonerated. In 1949, unemployment rose with demobilization. By 1955, it hovered at levels that seem today coercively low. In 1948, the Berlin airlift brought in more food than the city had ever brought in by rail in peacetime. The arithmetic is unsentimental. It is also a source of consolation. It affirms that people did what could be done, and that the cost of what could not be done is counted differently. The courage here is not heroic in the way a statue knows how to describe. It is stubbornness turned humane. It is Hilda lifting another brick in a city that did not love her before the bombs and did not love her less after. It is Erica arriving with a trunk full of photographs and no address, and deciding to stay anyway. It is Carl stamping papers that he knows, allocates scarcity, and hoping the math of his decisions bends toward fairness. It is a young Jewish mother in a DP camp deciding to teach her child to write in Yiddish and in German, as if prophylaxis. It is a teacher, dismissed and retrained, deciding to tell her students the parts of history the book ignored. It is even, with caution and without exoneration, the engineer who kept the waterworks running under a regime and then kept them running afterward, as if the moral imperative were hidden inside the pipes. The documents record so much and so little. Occupation reports catalogue mood like weather, and sometimes the weather was everything. Denazification files create classes of guilt that the moral life resists. Allied intelligence summaries capture their authors' biases and also their occasional clarity. Bundesarchiv records hold local decrees about stray dogs and orders about firewood that, when read together, describe a civic life resuming with vegetables and bylaws before it resumed with consciences. Oral histories, 20, 30, 40 years later, layer recollection over silence and create an echo chamber of phrases that comfort and also trap. We did not know. We could not say. We had our children to feed. All true and all incomplete. It is the mathematics of language. A sentence can fit only so much truth before it breaks or becomes unutterable in a kitchen. In his office, Carl kept a drawer labeled pending. It was where he placed files waiting on other files, queries that could not be answered until someone else answered another query. It was where he placed, sometimes, letters that should have been answered, but carried with them too much past. When he retires in the mid-1960s, he empties the drawer. He burns nothing. He takes home only his notebook and the habit of taking quiet responsibility for errors he did not make but could have corrected. He will not be canonized for it. He will not be despised for it either. It will disappear into the arithmetic of his days, counted if at all by those who benefited from his caution without knowing why they were spared. On a different May Day, years later, the city marks another anniversary. There are wreaths at the memorial for the victims of war and tyranny. There is a separate wreath with a label that says, "For the murdered Jews of this city," placed by a community smaller than memory. There is a wreath for bomb victims. There are speeches in which the words, "never again," are spoken with varying degrees of commitment. Children run around a fountain. Some men look uncomfortable in suits. A municipal band plays. The mathematics of commemoration is as careful as his old forms. Everyone gets a wreath. No one gets enough words. The Trümmerfrauen grow old. The expellees become locals. The DPs leave for new countries or stay and become neighbors. The black market becomes a cautionary story told by grandfathers to grandchildren who think of black markets as things in novels. The denazified resume work and become respectable. The categories of guilt flatten into biographies that only archivists remember. The currency becomes money again. The silence remains as a medium for sound. He opens his notebook to one of the first pages and sees the line he wrote on the second week of occupation. The writing is hurried and sharp. In this new piece he wrote on 14 May 1945, "Guilt will be rationed like bread and silence will be our currency." He adds below it, in a hand that has softened, "We lived that equation for years. When the numbers changed, the habit remained." The front line after 1945 ran through my memory and my paperwork, not across a battlefield,